London was still black when the engines rolled in. No sirens, no lights, no warning. Just a convoy moving with a purpose so rehearsed it felt choreographed. Roads normally filled with late-night traffic held their breath as unmarked vehicles bent corners and sealed streets with military precision. Residents assumed it was routine until doors started falling. 3:16 in the early hours, the first breach registered like a thunderclap, then another, then another. 14 locations hit in under 70 seconds. 47 seconds after the first entry, entire blocks were locked down. No press vans, no live streams, no rumours yet. Just the teeth-click silence of a major operation unfolding faster than the internet could notice. Digital forensic units moved in wearing gloves thicker than the knife. People watching from windows did not see panic, they saw process. And that was when London realised this was not a disturbance, this was a dismantling.
They targeted, trafficked and trapped 10 vulnerable women in a life of drugs and desperation. At squalid flats across Dundee, the Romanian gang plied their victims, aged between 16 and 30, with drink and drugs.
The headline that could not be stopped. By 6:30 in the morning, fragments of the story were leaking into closed messaging groups and local gossip threads. The first versions were shapeless. Police activity, major arrests, something digital. But headlines are evolutionary creatures. They grow sharper as the day warms. By 9:45, the language locked into place. A grooming network enforced through fake non-disclosure agreements dismantled. Leaders detained, thousands of files seized, materials described as horrific. It spread because it triggered two primal instincts at once, fear and curiosity. The claim was not merely illegal activity, it was a system, not a loose network, an architecture, built, maintained, scaled. That changes a crime into revelation. Numbers followed, and numbers always give rumours bone structure. 31 arrests, 14 raid points, over 120 digital devices sealed, 4 servers extracted whole, transported under forensic isolation. Estimates pointing to more than 400 terabytes of data capture, cloned, mirrored, quarantined before suspects ever reached a password prompt. People did not gasp at the arrest, they gasped at the enormity. 400 terabytes is not a file, it is a landscape, a digital continent, proof not of impulse but of industry. The numbers tell you how big, the documents tell you how it worked. Paperwork instead of shackles. Investigators briefed internally used a phrase that later leaked with viral velocity. They built a prison out of contracts, not chains.
First select committee or public accounts committee I've been before asking for better sharing of data between services and agencies, and I think I put in one of the recommendations we need to look at how we make that mandatory, and therefore if something isn't mandatory or people don't do it, what consequences?
This network had crafted what appeared to be binding non-disclosure agreements using visual language lifted from legitimate corporate and legal templates. Seals, reference clauses, formal consequence sections, penalty phrasing tailored to intimidate rather than inform, threats disguised as compliance. Victims were reportedly told that disclosure could result in civil damages, arrest, deportation, imprisonment, or destruction of personal reputation. The documents carried section breaks, clause headers, initial lines, and signature pages designed to mirror enforceable agreements under United Kingdom law. They were, according to early legal review, fraudulent documents, but they were convincing ones. And belief is the hinge on which silence swings, because the cruelty in operations like this is not physical force, it is psychological architecture. The victims did not resist because they thought resistance was illegal. They did not speak because they believed speech was punishable. The power of the system was not confined in a room. It lived in the mind. The fear was not violence. It was consequence. Consequence crafted out of artificial legality, wielded by a network that understood that most people fear contracts more than confrontation. Professionals in trauma psychology confirm that coercive control structured through formal documentation embeds deeper compliance than intimidation alone. Threats feel subjective. Paper feels absolute. One can fear a person and still act. It is far harder to disobey a document you believe the whole system will defend. Control begins long before a signature. So let's trace the path, how the net was built. To understand the scope, investigators reconstructed the recruitment pipeline backwards. It did not resemble the crude patterns most people associate with grooming rings. There were no single points of contact lurking in alleyways or shadow-lit forums. This was a distributed intake system wearing the skin of opportunity. The entry points mimicked industry pathways young people are conditioned to admire, not avoid. Social media recruitment posts offered promotional work, modelling introductions, talent management, nightlife staffing, influencer collaboration, photography networking, appearance bookings, and exclusive career pipelines for rising personalities. Each touched a different demographic while feeding a single back-end system. The lure was not secrecy. The lure was visibility. Initial engagement resembled opportunity. The next stage resembled initiation. Photo shoots framed as career portfolios. Social events framed as networking. Private studio sessions framed as content creation. None of these interactions appeared exploitative. At point of entry, the leverage was not applied at recruitment. The leverage was applied at dependency. Once material, images, or personal vulnerability existed in captured form, the pivot occurred not through threats first, but through contracts. Non-disclosure agreements introduced as standard industry safeguarding. A believable narrative anchored in a believable document. Victims were told signing was normal, necessary, professional, a formality, and once signed, they were told it was absolute.
I believe it's massive, and I believe that each town will have some sort of link. Like I always stress, these men don't just operate in one area. Your likelihood is that they move around. I know that I found that in my experience that, you know, my abusers wouldn't just operate here, they'd be up and down the country.
Psychologists describe this progression as compliance stacking. The subject says yes to opportunity, then yes to procedure, then yes to formality, then yes to authority, until no longer recognising there was ever a moment to say no. Then the math slipped, not the people, the pattern, the error that unravelled everything. Networks of this complexity do not fall because they are sloppy. They fall because systems intersect. The thread that pulled this one loose was not bravery or betrayal. It was digital overlap. One of the lower tier organisers reused a device previously flagged in an unrelated financial crime investigation. The device, wiped but not sterilised, communicated once with a cloud cluster shared across multiple alias accounts. That connection fed an anomaly into the National Crime Analysis pattern grid. Not a red flag, a grey one, nothing urgent, nothing screaming, just wrong enough to trip a review. Forensic analysts pulled metadata trees and found structured connectivity not consistent with random usage. It was not the crime that surfaced first, it was the architecture. From there began 8 months of silent observation. No raids, no interviews, no public movement. Investigators mapped networks, built digital mirrors, identified storage nodes, catalogued relationships, and established victim safeguarding pathways long before the public ever heard a siren. By the time warrants were prepared, agencies already knew where data lived, how it moved, who accessed it, and which doors had to fall simultaneously to prevent the network from collapsing into encrypted erasure. This was not disruption, it was surgical removal. The raid, minute by minute. At 03:16 hours, tactical teams confirmed position. At 03:17, breach order activated. At 03:19, digital choke points triggered to isolate servers. At 03:21, forensic capture units embedded live mirroring protocols into storage racks.
Please stay there! Stay there! Stay where you are! Please! Stay where you are!
At 0326, suspect devices were sealed in Faraday isolation. At 0334, victim safeguarding officers were on site at secondary locations. At 0410, operation status officially marked contained. No dramatic standoff. No footage of masked units rushing corridors. No shouted negotiations. The restraint of the operation was the point. Loud raids destroy data, quiet raids preserve it, and the priority here was not spectacle. What the public saw was handcuffs. What mattered was hardware. What was seized versus what was seen. The public saw arrests. Investigators cared about infrastructure. 120 devices were not laptops and phones alone, but layered storage chains. Wholly networked personal units, cold storage blocks, external drives labelled as innocuous business archives, 4 commercial servers configured with decentralised partitioning, automated cloud sync pathways designed to duplicate deletion, multi-layer encryption keys stored off-device, data categorised not by name but by access permission and leverage potential. There were folders formatted like corporate departments, logs written like workflow reports, and spreadsheets indexing human beings the way logistics companies index parcels. Priority, risk, compliance probability, volatility score. The descriptions that leaked first were blunt. A digital filing system for control. Behind every label was a life. Open the files, meet the people. The human face behind the archive. Amid terabytes and terminology, the emotional centre risked vanishing. So outreach teams moved quickly to establish what raw data cannot convey. Victims did not see themselves as victims. Within the system, they saw themselves as signatories, participants, even professionals.
My childhood was taken away from me by these men. I should have been out with friends, playing in parks and being innocent, hanging around on the streets, enjoying my childhood and creating memories I would be able to cherish and look back at as an adult. However, my life was far from that.
Many believe their silence was a contractual obligation, not a coercive wound. One safeguarding officer described the most devastating moment not as disclosure, but disbelief. When told the contracts were not legally valid, some victims did not cry with relief. They sat stunned, asking the same question repeatedly. Then why did everyone act like they were real? That is the cruelty of psychological confinement. Liberation arrives not as a key, it arrives as cognitive demolition. The walls vanish, but the mind does not trust the openness. And public reaction was not unified. It rarely is. Within hours, opinions polarised into categories as predictable as clockwork, but as emotionally divergent as nations. Outrage demanded accountability. Grief demanded protection. Cynicism demanded conspiracy. Commentary demanded villains with faces. The internet demanded immediate names, motives, accomplices, enablers, political links, media silence, institutional cover, scandal architecture, chains of complicity, and simplified explanations for complex machinery.
These types of findings have all been heard before. It causes decent people to feel enormously frustrated at the failure of agencies, including the police.
The investigation offered none of those. Complexity does not compress into hashtags. Investigations do not reveal their anatomy to satisfy impatience. That vacuum between public hunger and official pacing is where narratives mutate fastest. The legal earthquake coming. Law experts warn that the implications extend further than the individual arrests. If non-legally binding documents are intentionally engineered to mimic legal authority for the purpose of coercion, courts will have to decide whether the documents themselves become instruments of abuse, equivalent to physical threats. This is not just fraud, this is structural manipulation of belief. Legislation may evolve to include impersonation of legal authority for coercive control as a prosecutable offence category. This case may not only punish defendants, it may rewrite precedent. But while the briefs are drafted, the city pretends nothing happened. Tonight, the city looks normal again. By evening, cordons collapsed inward, vans left, uniform presence thinned, commuters reclaimed pavement patterns, life resumed its rehearsed rhythm. But stories like this do not end when tape comes down. They begin when the first drive is decrypted. London is no longer asking what happened, but what is still hidden? And who constructed the templates used to silence hundreds without wielding a single weapon? Because the unsettling revelation is not that exploitation existed, it is that it wore credentials. This was not a criminal ring hiding outside the system. This was a criminal ring costuming the system and climbing inside it. If you want updates that go beyond the headlines and hype, stay with the facts. This story is bigger than the raid itself. Evidence, not spectacle, changes everything. How does it make you feel knowing people were controlled and silenced through documents alone? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. Subscribe for the next update when the forensic breakdown drops, and give this video a like if it opened your eyes. Share it with someone who needs to see how deception can hide behind paperwork. Stay alert, stay informed.